And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Benched with Bubba, episode 801. We're going to chat up a little, kind of recap a few things in 2025 for this individual, talk about 2026, get some thoughts on what's coming up for us this season as free agency maybe halfway done, give or take. Trades will happen, more foreign signings will happen, strategy will need to take place, and much, much more for the 2026 fantasy baseball season. But this guy's coming back to the show for his second time. Very excited to have him. We chatted about the Champions League last time. We're going to chat about that and much more today. You can find him on Twitter at Dustin L. McComas. Dustin McComas, how you doing, my friend?
Oh, Bubba, I was bending your ear for a little bit coming on here. So my eardrum didn't explode, ruptured the other day from an ear infection, thanks to a daycare cold that came home. And this morning we held a ceremony for my son's first pet, a fish. Unfortunately, the trip from the North Pole was a little too much. It didn't last too long, so we've been having to explain that this morning. Just the joys of the holiday season. Illnesses and pets and gifts. But yeah, otherwise it was a good Christmas, and looking forward to flipping the page to 2026. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, I didn't have the animal pet situation. That'll come one of these days, but the illnesses, that's a real thing this
Oh
time
yeah.
of the year coming from
Yep.
daycare. My goodness. People probably get annoyed of parents talking about it, but once you have it, you understand
Yeah.
because it's ferocious and it doesn't end. When you think you're in the
No.
clear, it keeps
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah.
So
It lingers. It lingers. It feels like it never disappears.
it never leaves the house. So
No.
yes, I feel you there. It's a shame that I grew up as a kid. I was like had the worst ear infections like all the time. It was a bad deal. So those are miserable. I can only imagine having it rupture on you like that. But I'm glad you could make it. We're gonna chat up some 2025, 2026, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. For those that don't know, Dustin goes on the Pull Hitter podcast quite often with our buddy Rob DiPietro. So go check those shows out. Dustin is a very successful fantasy player. I would say everyone has their own. I think he's very very good at this. That's why I have him on to chat with him. But before we get into that, let everybody know kind of like roughly how 2025 went, because I've talked about my struggles with 2025. Some people did
Hmm.
great, some people didn't, but just give people an idea because yeah, you went from being number one in the Champions League to how 2025 go.
Yeah, it was this crazy hobby game, whatever we want to call it, like can be humbling sometimes. And 2025 was not great by my standards. It was kind of a break even kind of a year, but we'll get into the Champions League auction. Didn't do nearly as well as I wanted to in that, but I kind of knew heading into that first live auction, you're going in there with 14 of the other best players, like literally in the world. It's going to be tough. Great learning experience though, and really my most frustrating thing is I had a main event team that my only main event team that was in first for probably 4 or 5 months maybe, and just kind of crash and burn at the end. It was one of those things you could kind of see as was happening. You couldn't really stop it from happening. There were some things that could have corrected along the way, some fab decisions and things like that. So that was really frustrating seeing that kind of slip away. When your biggest leagues don't end up being successful, it kind of dampens everything else. So otherwise, it was just kind of a average, frustrating. Certainly not the like 2024 where I feel like everything kind of clicked. But it's good. It gives you more fuel for the fire. Dive back into your prep, see where you need to change anything, and go on for there. Some of that stuff is just kind of out of your control, like injuries here or there. I had Chris Sale on a couple of important teams. I had Emmanuel Classe on 2 out of my 3 Champions League teams, which
Oof.
can't
Yeah.
predict a guy getting popped for gambling
No.
right about 2/3 through the year. So some things out of my control, some things I definitely need to tweak. But overall, it was a bit of a frustrating, but not like a horrible kind of a year. I still ended up won a couple leagues, cashing a few others, a couple teams in top 100 overall. So not a complete disaster, but certainly not the year I wanted to have.
Yeah, still a pretty good season nonetheless. If you're still cashing like that, so that is very very solid. And yeah, that's one thing we talk about. Like 6-month seasons. It's not like football where like it's a war of attrition, and you start having those injuries, and then like you said, a guy getting popped for gambling. Where did
Right.
that come into the research project there? So there's so many factors that, and by the time he got popped, like who knew if he had enough fab to get Cade Smith? Like that's a whole nother conversation for every individual league that took place there. Something you mentioned that I've been battling with, that's like actually a resolution of mine, is to make better fab decisions.
Hmm.
You mentioned like as a fab decision here and there, and you know, if you really take something seriously, like you take this, I take this, others do, you always have like looking back moments where it's Captain Hindsight. Like there's nothing you can do about it. But how do you go about learning from those fab decisions to try to make yourself a better fab player? I guess because like the art of fab is it's never perfect. There's no rhyme or reason. Every league's different. Like there's a way you
Hmm.
can approach it. Like there's no doubt about that. But every league's gonna make like some will go for a buck and you just go, what the heck? And then some go for
Yeah.
100. Yeah, that's never. So how do you like the frustration you saw this year looking at fab? Because I have the same. This is one of my big things I want to fix. How do
Hmm.
you go about kind of approaching? I'm going to do something different next year potentially.
Yeah, I think you look back at like, I mean, it's easy to kind of go through back, look week by week and just kind of see where you spent your money, where were you successful, where were you not successful. And like you said, every league's different in that, the player availability in some league is going to be different than another league. Like you mentioned, Emmanuel Class A. I think if I remember correctly, because he had that weird start to the year and then was just kind of uneven at times. I want to say Cade Smith was like actively stashed in my league, and I'm sure he was in several leagues. So it's like, you can't go blow the bank on Cade Smith if you have Emmanuel Class A if somebody's already stashing him and that sort of deal. So I kind of go back through and I look at where I spent my money. What was I spending my money on? What was I not spending my money on? Like kind of weighing those big moves. Like didn't get Chase Burns and spent on. I'll never forget this one. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to make a big bid for Burns, but I'm not going to blow the bank, and because I'm okay if I don't get him. If my second guy was Justin Robleski, I just read that wrong. I was like, man, he's throwing well. He's a lefty. He throws 98. He's in the Dodgers rotation. His Sierra is great. Everything underlying is great. And then in typical Dodgers fashion, he was out of the rotation and back down in 2 weeks later. So kind of weighing to see like, should I have spent, kind of get onto those bigger prizes? Should I have not? Really, for me, it was targeting the wrong types of players. I kind of went back through it and I was really surprised that I consistently across the board always rate well in at bats. And like all of my teams have a lot of at bats, just because typically if you have a lot of at bats, it usually correlates to runs and RBI and homer and standing gains points and all that sort of thing. And I went back and looked this year, and this was the first year I really noticed that correlation was not nearly as strong as it used to be. And there could be an array of factors for that. One of them is I think that we're in a very much a platoon era now. The plate appearances for left-handed hitters keep going up. More teams are getting smart about platooning and that sort of deal and maximizing those platoon advantages and things like that. So to me, it was kind of looking back at through and it's like I just wasn't really. I feel like I was kind of trying to fill holes to have somebody in the active lineup that's in a lineup every day, as opposed to going out and trying to get a skills guy. Like missing on Addison Barger by like $3 is something I kind of go back to. It's like if you really believe that a guy with those sorts of skills that he's showing, like, and he's a fit for your team. I mean, you just need to make it a point to like go get him. Don't be worried if you're $10 or $12 over, because you might end up missing him by $2 or $3 like I did. So for me, it was a good lesson of like I just had way too much of the Nick Gonzalez's and guys like that who are going to be in the lineup. They're going to hit third through sixth. You're going to look at weekly projections and they're going to rate well because they're in the lineup every day. But then you got to catch yourself sometimes. Okay, is this guy stealing bases? Is this guy hitting home runs? Is he in a good lineup overall? Like lineup positioning is one thing, but I'd almost rather have Sedan Rafaela hitting ninth in the Red Sox lineup than Nick Gonzalez hitting third in the Pirates lineup. Although that lineup's a little bit better now, but so that was the big lesson for me, was going through and like seeing what types of players I was buying, what other people were getting, and how it helped them in the standings and things like that.
I absolutely love that because I know you and Rob talked about it. I've talked about it for a while with Ryan and everything. Is the world of the platoon now is such a real thing,
Hmm.
and it wasn't like heck even last year because you mentioned it, but it was like it was been a big thing in recent seasons. Is
Yeah.
like why Weimer's so successful and others. It's like, hey, you need to accumulate at bats, at bats, at bats, at bats. Innings, pitching, pitching. Like, that's just the name of the game. And yes,
Mhm.
there's a ton of logic behind that. Not denying any of it, but as the game changes, I think our approach needs to change. To your point about the platoon thing, it's like I'm not saying just give up on at bats. It's still you need to accumulate. That's still very important.
Yeah.
But there's also the point you made is at least in Fab, maybe drafting's different. Like we can talk about
Mhm.
that in a little bit, but at least in Fab, like if there's a 6 game week and you're like, oh no, it's a 3-3, so I don't want this guy. But that three from that guy might be much better than the 4-2 from the other. Essentially, is where I'm going with this. So still, it's not ideal, but kind of
Right.
a rough example. Like maybe we should change our mindset because it used to
Yeah.
be automatic. You take the 4-2. So I like how you mentioned that quite a bit there. Um, we'll get back to some of that in 2026. I already have questions for you now after that. Let's talk about the Champions League, though, because for
Mhm.
those that well, I hope you listened to the episode with Dustin back in March. Um, he was number one in the Champions League. He was going to the first ever live auction Champions League draft in Vegas. Dustin had never done an auction before until he did an OLAC, like briefly beforehand. So this is why it fascinated me because I did my first auctions like 2 years ago on OLACs and everything, and I loved it. It's great, but the live auction's obviously different than the online auction. So just general synopsis. I got to talk to you live after the fact. Um, how was that first experience? Because you got to throw out the first bid. It was a
Yeah.
crazy room. Like people
Mhm.
were watching it. You mentioned the best of the best. And it goes to show you fantasy can be wild because some of those best of the best had a really rough season in there. That's just fantasy in the nutshell.
Mhm.
So how did that? How was that whole experience? I guess before we maybe dive into more of the Champions League.
Yeah, the experience itself was incredible. For anybody who plays this game seriously and has the spare funds to even entertain participating in this sort of deal, I can't recommend it enough. It's so much fun if you ever have the opportunity to qualify for that sort of thing. And I'm not gonna lie, I mean it's definitely intimidating. I mean, I had a lot of anxiety heading into it. I was telling my wife afterwards, it was kind of like I kind of compared it to, maybe you're giving like a huge speech at like you're a best man at a wedding or something like that. Just a lot of anxiety building up to like, man, I don't want to screw up. I've been prepping for this. It's this big deal. There's going to be a bunch of eyeballs on me. But it was a ton of fun, and but it's an experience. Like it's not anything you can simulate until you get in there and actually do it for the first time. You mentioned I did an OLAC, and that just kind of helped me learn about bidding and managing your money and the things to pay attention to while the draft's going on. And there's so much that you can kind of fixate yourself on just your team and just your plan and where your money is and where it's going and the board and all that sort of thing. But you also can, you need to pay attention to what's happening with the other teams, like where they might need players, like what positions are they light at, who has a lot of money, where are they light at, so you can kind of nominate players. I remember coming out of the break, I knew a lot of teams were really light on power, and I didn't really like Tyler O'Neill, but he was available. I was like, well, I'm going to throw Tyler O'Neill out there right away, get some money off the board for those teams that need power and that sort of deal. So there's all these little things you can pay attention to, but everything is happening so fast that you can kind of get caught up in what you're doing and kind of miss what's happening. And that's where the really skilled guys that have done this a time or two, or, in the case of some of these guys, 20, 25 times, they're really in tune with what else is happening in the league and stuff like that. But it was a ton of fun, but it's just not something you can really prepare for until you get in there and do it. And you mentioned, I mean, we had some massive heavy hitters in the auction arena that were in there as well. Mike Mager, Brody John, so many guys. I mean, Toby. And it's just, I think those guys that, Mager's won how many auction championships, Brody John's won who knows how much money doing live auctions. And you look in the, Brody John finishes ninth, Mike Mager's right behind me at 12th. And it's just like, I think it speaks to the unpredictability of that room because you just had a collection of guys that some have done it, some have never done it. You bring all those different styles of playing the game into that room. And I think it made it really, really difficult. So it was a lot of fun. I'm already looking forward to jumping into a live auction again at some point, probably in Vegas this year. But it's just not an experience that you can prep for. You can think you're prepped, but once you get in there and everything starts flying around, and you're like, "Well, I want to buy this guy and do this and do that." Well, some other guy might really want this guy, or five guys might really want this guy, and then you're kind of having to force to pivot to your second or third options, and that's where I really got hurt. I came out of there with like a lot of guys I didn't ever really have on my target list, and that's just kind of the way it goes. You've got to adjust on the fly to who's spending what and how much other people might want some of your players that are on your target board.
Yep, that's the beauty of the auction, honestly. Like, it's not I talk about it time and time again, it's probably annoying people by now, but the reason I'm loving the auction more and more is the snake draft, you're kinda at the mercy of KDS unless you wanna start jumping players. Like,
Right.
your pocket of options. An auction, it just goes. Like, you
Yeah.
you can have your list, but you can build all kinds of different ways. It's a beautiful, beautiful format. And side note, I do love, like, we talked about it before you went to Vegas, in Vegas, I love that you embraced the whole moment, like, you brought your wife, I think was it her sister, I believe, or
Yes.
her friend?
Yes.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. That was absolutely awesome. You guys, like, made it a fun trip. You enjoyed it. Like, that makes it even, like, cooler to me. It was one of those type of deals. So that was awesome. Now, obviously, your first time doing a live auction, you talked about, like, what would you do differently potentially? Like, I know you said it's on the fly, but I
Mhm.
just know the person you are, you've thought about it.
Yeah.
I know you'd be lying if you told me you haven't. Like, I know you've thought about it. So
Mhm.
what would you do differently as you, like, look forward to the future?
I think you can't assume that you're going to get in there and be able to get a certain amount of like your target list. Because there's just going to be. For me, it was the pitching side. To me, that's always been one of my strengths is just pitching at all levels and having targets at all levels and things like that. And then I came out of the draft with Dylan Cease, who wasn't a main target, Tanner Bybee, who wasn't a main target. I missed on Chris Sale, what I could have bought him, and like, jumped in there and got Gavin Williams early on, which was okay. But it's just like you kind of, and then there's like those kind of, when you get into a snake draft, it's like those ADP 260 to 320 kind of the guys, like but in this scenario, you don't know where those guys are going to go. Somebody might like that guy for $5. Somebody might like that guy for $3, $4, whatever it is. It's like projecting the pitching is something that like I thought I had a decent grasp on at least heading in there, but like I think that there's going to be people that just want to spend a lot of money on pitching. There's going to be people that might just want to buy from certain tiers, and it's like trying to figure out, who's going to spend money where on pitchers. And I just left there with a pitching rotation that I just like had was not really how I planned it out to be at all. It ended up really hurting me. I mean, at one point, I had the dreaded Easton Lucas two step around Easter,
Oh, yeah.
which was compounded with a Charlie Morton two step that same week. And like my ratios, like my ERA was like 5.3, WHIP was like one, almost 1.5. Like I was as low as you could be in ratios, which I never been in a position like that before. So it's like that's the thing is it's like you can't, if you don't come out there with the right type of players that you like, and you make a bad fab move here or there, you put yourself in a gigantic hole and you just can't get out of it. So that would be a part of it too. And also like, the price enforcing aspect. I ended up buying Jaron Duran and it wasn't a player that I wanted. I was like, I thought it was, he was going to go too cheap and I jumped in there and it kind of ended up burning me the way my roster ended up being built. Wanted to spend heavy on outfield. I came out there, Teoscar, Lawrence Butler, and Jaron Duran, and neither one of those guys like really busted, but none of them met like the price point that I paid for them. They didn't have the season that you thought you were going to get from those guys. Spending the money that you thought on them. So like just kind of being like smarter about allocating, your money, having multiple plans. It's like, okay, if pitching is going to go really, really high, maybe you start spending a lot of money on this tier. And like, I realize I'm following, Mager and Winokur, who are two legends in the auction. And those guys are so good about like having their money and they're rigid and they know where they think their values are and they're going to get their certain values and things like that. For me, I'm just not that kind of a seasoned player. So I think next time if I ever get in this type of situation, even if it means going $2, $3 above where I think,
Mhm.
I think that I'm just going to get a couple of the star type of players I really, really believe in at their price points, especially on the pitching side, and then make everything else from there. Like I feel like if you go into an auction, especially if you're spending a lot of money on an auction, I feel like you want to come out of there looking at the roster with like, okay, I love these guys. Like, okay, maybe it cost me $8 more than it should have, and I kind of blew through my budget, and it kind of cost me maybe some other places. But I can at least look at my roster and say, okay, I wanted these guys. Like
Yep.
these are the guys I wanted to buy in an auction, and that's not how it worked out for me in the Champions League.
I'm with you 100%. Like that's something I've been kind of working towards this season as I prepare for my stuff is I want to make sure I get like at least a couple of the guys I really, really want with their at a certain price point there. And the biggest thing I think besides finding the values that you want to figure out for these drafts, I think the next biggest step is like and it kind of what you mentioned is you need to know your pivots ahead of time. Because if you're trying to pivot on the fly, it gets real dicey. But if you do your proper prep, it's like, okay, I spent $2 more, which means my quote unquote budget's here is different. So where can I pivot to save money but still have like these are the players I'm okay with getting type deals? That kind of process. So you're ready for going over the quote unquote number that you want to spend because you're going to have to on certain players. To your point, as you learn, and in retrospect, you'll have less money elsewhere. So how do I pivot there? And I think that's where these quote unquote veterans do very, very well. I'm
Right.
with you
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
that.
Those guys are so seasoned. It's like, okay, if I wanted to spend a lot on catcher, my catchers are gone. I know where I can shift this money elsewhere and use my money wisely. That's just something that like it takes a lot of practice to do. And it's like
Mhm.
it helps kind of plan it out almost like multiple game plans to be able to adjust on the fly.
Agreed. Agreed. Anything else on that first Champions League, first auction experience you'd like to discuss? Otherwise, we're going to move to 2026.
I think the one thing about that's fun about auctions is, there's not an overall component, so there's a lot of different ways you can attack it, and it makes it fun in that like you might start really poorly in certain areas, and you can kind of adjust your fab process to really target other areas and that sort of deal. But no, it was a ton of fun. Again, I highly recommend anybody who's contemplating joining the Champions League qualifying process to jump in there and do it because if you do make that final table it kind of does have a little bit of a World Series of Poker kind of vibe when you look around the
Yeah,
room there and realize the qualification that went into reaching that room.
definitely. All right, let's look at 2026. I know you're pretty responsible in your setup here compared to other people I talk to when they just like let's go join this like let's go join. You waited, you joined your first DC recently, I believe, and
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
you're in there that with us and some other people. But what's your kind of 2026 game plan when it comes to drafts? You mentioned you're going to Vegas. You might try to
Mhm.
do an auction there. Ryan and I will be in auctions there, so we might see you at the table.
Nice.
What's your 2026 plan?
Yeah, it'll be similar to what I did last year. I usually do around 8 or so DCs, and I don't think last year and in years past, I've typically like, you hit the 30th round in one, you kind of trying to fire up another one. And I think I might just do like one at a time now. Because I really like using those as like, as you're going through and drafting, you kind of, you start doing dives on players. I haven't really looked into this guy yet. Let me kind of see what's going on there. You have a general idea of the player pool and where guys are going in ADP and all that sort of stuff. But I really use those a lot as prep, is like just kind of going through and researching players as I'm going, as I'm thinking about them, as I'm putting in the queue and seeing how the room treats sort of players and stuff like that. So I'll probably do around 8 DCs again. And I just love those because of the drafting element to it, but also just the in season maintenance is so low. There's no fab component. You're really just setting your lineup at the whole time. And then you get to the end of the year and you're just kind of hoping you have enough healthy bodies in there to throw in there. So probably around 8 DCs. Probably 2 to 3 OCs. I did 4 last year, and I thought it was too much. I thought it was too. I just felt like I didn't really know each individual team as well as I had in the past. So I'll probably limit that to about 2 to 3 this year. Be doing a live main in Vegas again as part of the CLQ. And I'd like to get into one live auction as well to kind of satisfy that itch that I didn't get qualifying the second time around for the Champions League. So it's like as much as we talk about this think about this, prep about this, all that sort of deal. It'd be kind of silly not to do an auction, you know? Like it's like you've
Yep.
almost wasted all of that time and in research and thinking about it to not go in there and try to buy, buy your guys, like
Yep.
that's your one opportunity to do it. Like you said, a snake draft, you can be so well versed in all the players and where the pockets are and this and that. But like if the snake draft doesn't fall your way, you might be left with a team that like doesn't truly represent your skill level and the work you've put in and things like that. So that's the game plan right now. And yeah, I've drafted 2 DC so far, and I'll probably be jumping into a new one here pretty soon.
Yeah, this is the first few days where I've had no draft going on since drafts opened. I kind of like I took the holiday off for a second, and I'm debating. Like I tell myself I'm waiting till the new year, but I know it won't happen. I'll probably be in one after this afternoon. But yeah, I've always have like my rule. I started last year. It's one at a time, like one at a time. That way you can kind of think through it, like you said, and go from there. You mentioned three OCs. Just out of curiosity, um, how do you go about differentiating there? Because obviously you're doing the OCs that you want the big overall component. You
Yeah.
have to do at least one for the CLQ. Of course,
Uh-huh.
that's part of how it goes. But how do you differentiate how you approach your three OCs?
Yeah, and this is something I'm probably going to have to change this year. Is I used to wait to draft those until the very very end, because I wanted to try to get out of 15 team mode. And maybe it was that I was like drafting DCs like later than I wanted to. I usually try to wait for my CLQ DC just to try to avoid the injury landmines with the pitchers in spring training. I feel like you reach a certain point where if those guys get on the mound a couple times, you can feel pretty good about, all right, they're going to get into the season, they're going to be okay. But man, my DC CLQ just went so slow, even though it was a 2 hour clock. And I'm still like messing with it in Vegas while I'm doing the live drafts there and things like that. And I feel like that brain kind of bled into my OC drafting, and I kind of drafted my OCs more like kind of draft and hold type of deals as opposed to going for the upside and the higher ceiling guys and really kind of because that's what you got to do in OCs, man. You look at the 80 percentile numbers in those leagues, it's really really high. So you've got to swing for the fences. And I'm not saying go in there and take every risky guy, but you do need to shoot for some upside in those drafts in order to compete in those leagues. So I'll probably cut off my DCs a little earlier this year and kind of just shift more to kind of that fab brain a little bit earlier on, because you do need to treat those drafts, differently. I mean, the fab component gives you a little bit of a buffer to where, okay, if you whiff on those risks you took in the middle to late rounds, you can kind of supplement those through fab, and you don't have to worry so much about just having the active guys that are in lineups all the time that fill those DC lineups. So I usually draft the OCs right after the Vegas mains, but that might change a little bit. I might have to do that a little bit before. It's just trying to cram all that stuff in there. You think, all right,
Exactly.
I've gotten through the injury issues. There's, the pitchers that hurt their elbows in spring training are already off the board. But it's tough to juggle all those types of games at the same time.
And it's funny you mentioned that because I agree with everything you're saying. There's trying to pack it all together at the end is tough. But I used to be a believer. Like my best teams are always the ones I draft last, and then
Uh,
last year, like my best teams were I did a beat Bubba OC like mid February, by far the best one I did, and there were
mm,
two CLQ guys, and then they both finished near the top also. So it was just it's I don't know, it's so all over the place when all
yeah.
things are said and done, and I think cramming it together could be tricky. You've done it in the past, so you know you better than anybody else. But you mentioned that 15 team brain versus that 12 team brain. Out of curiosity, because this is another one of my biggest problems. We kind of hinted at it earlier with Fab. Is how do you approach the difference between the two in Fab? Because that is a wild. Like I always joke, and many do that 12s are the wild wild west when when you're doing Fab. Where 15s at least there seems a little more structure involved
Mhm.
in those formats. So how do you approach those when you're sitting down there, whatever day, Sunday, Saturday, you do Fab to differentiate between the 12s and the 15s?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. Especially if you do multiple OCs in a year, you just kind of look at where players go price wise from league to league, and there's just no rhyme or reason sometimes. I mean, the hot prospect might go for like 413 in 1 year leagues and might go for 68 in the next one. So to me, I think that you can kind of get a little bit into the year and you can kind of see the rhythm at which your league bids. You kind of figure out, okay, who has what money, who's bidding a lot, like where, like a similar player, if a similar player has ever been available in free agency, where does he typically go? Like, there a couple teams in your league that overspend on those big prospect names, or are they kind of more reserved and don't really spend on those prospect names? I really found that about half, like a quarter to halfway through the league, you can kind of see how your league is bidding. Like there's going to be some guys that blew all their money already. You can kind of see where the league is really aggressive, and maybe it's just a handful of owners, and where they're not aggressive. And that, I kind of would like adjust my bids as I went. Like, okay, like Chase Burns is available. I think Chase Burns is going to go for um, 280 something in this league, but I think he might only go for about 140 in this league, just based on how the league is bidding. So I think you can learn a lot about just paying attention to how your league bids and how they bid for similar players. And kind of adjust from there. Maybe they're not really in tune with the platoon guys who are showing the skills, or maybe have an increase in playing time and things like that, but they're really in tune with the big prospect names or the guys coming off injury and stuff like that. So really paying attention to your league and just kind of trying to get a feel for how they bid, I think is the only way you can kind of predict that just unpredictableness of fab bidding and OCs. It truly is the wild, wild west, man. You just like, you might think you have it figured out, and somebody decides to spend $500 that week, and that's just kind of the way it goes.
Yep. Yeah, and especially maybe I don't know. I've never done a main event, but it feels like there's more like I said, structure there. When I do my fab recaps with Ben, we mainly focus on OCs, but we'll talk the main event in there. Um, but even like the last weeks of the year, when it seems like only a few guys are still going for it in OCs, that's definitely a format where people just kind of throw in the towel. It feels like at
Yeah.
certain points, you'll still
Yep.
have random guys to like a $700 bid out there because
Right.
like, oh, they woke up and realized we're in the main event, you're not getting that like ever.
No. No. No.
So,
No.
so you don't have to even worry about that. Where in a main event, you're like sitting there trying to fight for cashing in an OC, where it's only the top two, unlike other leagues.
Yeah.
And this guy out of nowhere, just like, yeah, that's frustrating.
Yeah,
So
the
I'll
the big
I'll
area you
get
can
it.
make in OCs is not leaving yourself some money at the end, because you can literally, if you manage it right, you can get anybody you want. I used to call it
Mhm.
sometimes like I do like hockey line shifts with my lineup. So just like, all right, it's a cores week. Let's just load up with the platoon guys in cores. I've got like $80. I can $7 and $8 bid a lot of these guys and just get them in there. So like, yeah, whatever you do in OCs, just leave yourself some money at the end, because you can start to get whoever you want for a reasonable price.
Yeah, like I like to reference the Gills. He's been super successful at it, and you'll watch him like the last month, almost 2 months of the season. It's all dollar and $2 guys. He
Yeah.
just sits there and play because you can do it as long as you have the funds to
Yep.
play that game. Um, for your draft prep, what's your general process on draft prepping? Like, some people like to look at projections, some people make their own projections, some
Mhm.
people make their own rank, so on and so forth. How do you approach the draft process?
Yeah, projection wise, I don't make mine. I respect the models and the people that do make theirs. It's just not something I could ever do. But I don't really pay attention to them for pitchers like at all. So pitching to me is where I think there's the most gain to be made, because the projections aren't, to me, just aren't as accurate as they are with hitters. For example, I was looking at Drew Rasmussen's steamer projection the other day, and Drew Rasmussen in his career still like 486 innings or something like that. And I think his career whip is like 108. And Steamer's got a projected for like 127, like, because it's just like some things like that. I think there's some projections that they keep wanting to regress guys back to certain BABIPs, even though they've shown the skill to limit hard contact over and over and over and over again. So I go through and I'll do like a deep dive on probably like 150 pitchers that I have interest in for drafts. I mean, because you're doing DCs, you've got to know, the bottom of the starting pitcher pool, the prospects, the
Mhm.
guys, how the rotations look, and who might be able to get 10, 12 starts for a team, as opposed to the top prospect that might be a little less likely to get like 5 starts for a team based on what the rotation looks like. So I go through it, I do deep dives on all the pitchers, and I'm kind of just looking for anything that might change how their outlook is for the upcoming season. So a lot of times it's kind of just looking at the underlying stuff that we all look at, this year, the K minus BB, all that sort of stuff, but really kind of going through and seeing, like, I like to look at splits, and I like to look at monthly splits and first half, second half splits and all that sort of deal. and see if there's any dramatic change. And if there is, you just kind of try to poke holes through and figure out why. Like what changed? Was it a pitch mix? Did his arm angle change? Did kind of reading through news that something changed with the delivery? What is it that sparked this sort of change? And kind of keep diving through and seeing like, okay, like yeah, this guy started throwing this pitch way more the last 2 months of the season, and oh wow, his strikeout rate went up, his walk rate went down, his results followed. Just trying to go through and find that sort of stuff, because that to me is where you can make the most value, is with the pitching, is hitting on those middle round, those late round guys who can return way more value than you're getting at that sort of spot. I mean, the guy like the 2 years ago, the Garrett Crochets of the world, and guys like that could just have that kind of breakout kind of a year. So that's a big part of my prep, and then it's kind of going through at the end of the season and just thinking about what lineups looked like at the end of the year. Who was playing, how often were they playing? Were their lefties starting to get some at bats against left-handed pitching? Were their guys kind of falling into a more strict platoon? How did the team talk about this guy? Where was he hitting in the lineup? Were they moving him up? Was he kind of falling down? Was he kind of losing playing time? That sort of deal. Because we do so much, and then we all kind of want to get a break a little bit. But you kind of don't want to also forget all those things that were happening at the end of the year, because sometimes they can give us a preview of what's to come in the future as well. So that's a big part of the prep. And then with the hitting, I trust the projections. I look at them, I see, you know, do I agree with them? Do I agree with really it's the playing time? Like a lot of projections last year had PCAs like a strict platoon guy. And then if you started playing with the plate appearances, you're like, wait a minute. Like if this guy gets 600 plate appearances, he smashes his value where he's going in drafts. And then you think about, okay, it's elite center field defense. They want the glove out there. This guy's probably going to get that many plate appearances. So really, it's like I kind of trust it a lot with the hitters, but I just kind of want to go through and see, right, where might the playing time be off? And because that to me is where you can find your big advantage with the hitters.
Yeah, I agree. The hitters, the projections much more usable is the way I'd use them, or at least tweakable. To your point of trying to figure out where you can plus and minus that playing time situation. But the pitching is definitely something I want to ask you about, because you hinted at it, you mentioned it kind of earlier. That pitching, you have a good a grasp on it. It feels like that's something you focus on quite a bit through your other work that you do and everything. Um, how do you mentioned the first half, second half splits? You mentioned pitch mixes. When you approach, I don't know, putting your game plan together for pitching, besides just doing that, like how do you like? There's blobs that will probably hint at later in the show here of certain pockets. Like what things do you look for to differentiate maybe in the elite tiers of pitching? Like later on, you can definitely pick up like Simeon Woods Richardson, common name, big pitch mix change, strikeouts
Mhm.
followed. We know that
Yeah.
stuff. But like
Mhm.
you mentioned Dylan Cease earlier, he's in a world where there's a lot of kind of similar pitchers, but maybe not. Like, how do
Yeah.
you use your pitching analysis to kind of differentiate there?
Yeah, I think you gotta think about, like, where these guys like, where are they strong statistically? And I think sometimes it just kinda helps to just go through and look at the player rater, like, from previous seasons, and just to kinda get an idea of, like, yeah, these guys might have similar value overall, but where are these guys helping you and where are these guys hurting you? And having knowledge of how do these guys you know, fit my team as it's currently being constructed. And that helps with having, multiple paths or multiple guys that you're interested in each kind of little SP pocket is, okay, if I took a risky guy early, I kind of need more of a floor guy later on. But in the case of like a Dylan Cease, like, okay, I know I'm going to get a lot of strikeouts there. I think the ERA is probably going to bounce back, but we know the whip has been a thing for him for years. So you need to plan for, I've got to target some whip other places to kind of support this Dylan Cease pick, because that way his strikeouts are going to be valuable to me if I think the ERA is going to bounce back. But I need to make sure that whip is not ultimately doing more harm than not doing harm. If you're using that kind of a draft pick on a pitcher of that caliber, so it's really understanding where these guys rate strongly. Right? Are they volume guys? Are these guys getting strikeouts through volume, or are they getting strikeouts through a per at bat per inning kind of a deal. Are these guys a little bit more on the risky side, or are they going to be guys that are a little bit more likely to throw your 180 innings? Are they in rotations to where it's, they might every so once in a while try to be like an unofficial six man where he's giving these guys a little extra rest, and there might be a little less opportunity for two steps, like the Yamamoto type deal, or these kind of more traditional five pitcher rotations. They're going to get their two steps and that sort of deal. So it's really kind of understanding where these guys rate strongly. Like to me, ERA, I think it kind of fluctuates sometimes. But to me, WHIP I think is a little more easier to predict. Like
Yeah.
I think your guys that generally have good whips are going to have good whips, and the guys that sometimes don't, I think they're probably going to keep continuing to be that way. So, I know you brought up Cease. Like at Cease, like I don't think anybody would be surprised if he has a 3.5 ERA next year. But I think we'd be really surprised if he had like a 106 whip.
Yep.
Like, it's like, but
Good
if you
point.
plan, okay, Dylan Cease, like I think the ERA is gonna bounce back, but I need to plan for the whip being in this sort of spot. And understanding too, like he throws a lot of innings, like Logan Webb. I really liked Logan Webb last year, like Logan Webb this year, but you got to understand if Logan Webb's going to throw 200 innings with that kind of whip, that's
Oh man.
gonna be a whip anchor, and it's gonna drag down your whip a little bit if you're not having some other guys. If you're not pairing him early on with like a Chris Sale or maybe a Christopher Sanchez or somebody like that who might throw you 170 innings of good whip to help kind of counteract that as well. So just really understanding where those guys, their skill and their value is, and how they're impacting your rotation and your ratios.
No, I love that. That's a very, very good point about volume is great. Volume could also hurt you in a massive way
Yes.
at the
Yes.
same time. It's
Hmm.
like we talked about it earlier. We're talking about it a few more times probably throughout the show is yeah, we focus on these innings pitched, we focus on the at bats, but if they're if they're not quality innings pitched, or like the weird part is to your point, like with Webb, it's quality. It's just the whip
Right.
stinks. Like, everything
Yeah.
else is great. So it's like you're gonna pitch him every day. You just got to figure out how to build around. You mentioned Christopher Sanchez. People don't like Shota as much, it seems like, but the dude's
Hmm.
been a whip machine. Like you're gonna get those things.
Yeah.
So just stuff like that. To your point. Let's flip it to the hitters real quick because speaking of at bats, we talked about it earlier. I want to bring it back to this. Um, Targeting at bats, platoons involved. You look at projections. You talked about the PCA example last year. When you're in your draft room per se, how focused are you on these exact at bats you're looking at? Because like early on, starters are starters. Then it
Hmm.
gets murkier as the draft goes on. So how are you approaching that kind of scenario as times are changing to target certain players via either plate appearance projections or guys that are still very good that might not have as many plate appearance projections?
Yeah, I think this is what it helps using something like an auction calculator or something SGP wise, because I think sometimes we can kind of get caught up in like the skills of some guys, but if they're not providing the counting stats, you just have to understand, what kind of value they're returning. I mean, they'll get like the 80th percentile stuff for runs and homers and RBI, and kind of understanding, okay, like on average, this is what all my players have to contribute for me to even come close to this 80th percentile kind of deal. So I think like an auction calculator and that sort of stuff helps because you just kind of get an idea of where those guys fit from like a counting stat standpoint. But really, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, is I just had too many at bats oriented guys that were in lineups a lot. And I think that, your Brendan Donovan's, yeah, this is a poor example because I mean, Jung Hoo Lee is a guy I had a lot of interest in
Mhm.
last year because I was like, he's going to hit lead off. He's going to play all the time. It's okay to have, I think, one of those guys, maybe two of those guys, but you just have to understand that like you need some roto juice too. So when I'm looking
Yeah.
at those platoon guys, I like to think of it as like those guys when I put them in the lineup, are these guys capable of having one of those games every so often where it's like one homer, one steal, or two homers and a steal, or drove in five with two homers, like those kind of skills that just kind of pop off the page, or that are capable of having, like I know you play a lot of DFS, like
Mhm.
those guys that kind of, you almost think of it like like
Yep.
DFS, like
100%.
in these, when these guys get these matchups in these platoons, and they get two out of three righties on a weekend, and the righties are just kind of average right-handed pitchers. are these guys capable of like just popping off and having that big game? You know, like because if you think of like what the stats you need to accumulate in a week, you've got a guy that might every so often pop you 2 homers or steal you 2 bags and hit a home run. Like that's a week's worth of production, like
Yep.
right there from a single game. So I think you just kind of look at the positional how the positions work. And this is really true with outfielders. You kind of reach a point with outfielders, like you get a lot into the platoons. I'm like, all right, where are these guys going to hit in the lineup? But do these guys have some juice? Like, do I see some skills here? Like, hey, this guy could be a good home run threat, or hey, this guy's a true homer speed threat that could potentially give me that home run and steal, during a scoring period, as opposed to that guy just kind of putting in there because he's in the lineup 6 out of 7 times a week, but he might just accumulate 3 runs or 3 RBI, not hit a home run, not steal a base, might hit 260. So I'm really looking for those platoon guys that have that juice that can really provide that power speed, or maybe they're really good in one thing, like a home run type deal, and they hit in a good spot of the lineup. It can kind of really impact your team that way.
I totally agree with all that. And DFS is a great example, trying to like pinpoint the guys that can pop for a game or two is something you definitely see. Also, like I've mentioned multiple times throughout my time here on the podcast, is DFS helps me stay up to date on like trends and
Yep.
all that kind of stuff, which really helps me a lot, even if it's just a little bit every day, just to kind of keep the brain in that world. You mentioned the outfielder thing. I think it's a great, like, we'll pivot back to some 2026 stuff here in a minute, but this is related. You've done 2 DCs, I believe you said.
Hmm.
And outfield's one of those positions, especially in a DC, a 15 teamer, that you're going to have 3 guys that probably don't platoon for sure, maybe 4 if you're really
Hmm.
aggressive, 5. Otherwise, you are in the platoon world, and you're going to draft 10 to 12 outfielders, give or take, however you set up. For maybe you'll have more, but that's the general synopsis there. How do you approach outfield in that format? Do you prefer to be aggressive and get 5 that you don't feel like platoon? Or are you cool with like, hey, I'm going to get like 3 or 4 studs, and then I'm going to make sure my platoon guys are like dominant Canzones of the world that we know when they're in that week, they're money.
Yeah, that's a great question because I think that like I usually go through after the end of DC drafts and I just kind of look at how people draft outfield. And there's just some teams sometimes like, oh man, you got a tough
Yep.
road ahead, because you got to play 5 of those guys.
Well,
And if
it's a way to easily lose plate appearances. I know we're
yes,
talking about how it's changing, but at the same
you
time,
got to have them.
this is where you
Yeah.
can this is where you can play the platoon game
Yep.
because of the depth. So
Yeah.
sorry, but yeah,
Yeah, now you could play one of those guys a utility too. So you could have
yes,
some lineup periods where you can have 6 outfielders in your lineup. And I like to make sure, if I can, to have like 3 or 4 of those quote unquote studs, or at least guys I feel like are going to be in the lineup more often than not. They have the skills I like. They typically have a decent lineup position. They're going to play pretty close to every single day. I try to get 3 or 4 of those guys, and also too, this really helps paying attention to like just how the draft is treating those guys. Like my first DC, I thought it was a little easier to navigate kind of how the outfield drafting was going and like what's available. And my second one was like, man, people all across the board kind of had the same idea of like, let's make sure we get some outfielders early on. So paying attention to how people are drafting outfielders. But yeah, I try to get at least 3 or 4 guys. I think in the draft we did, I had 3 guys in the first 10 rounds, and I felt pretty good about that. 3 guys I like, 3 guys are going to play all the time, and then you just kind of start picking off those platoon guys for there. But I've noticed too, like people are pretty sharp to the platoon guys that have those skills that we were talking about. That can pop for when they're in there. Maybe they only get 450 plate appearances over there, but maybe they hit 22 homers, or maybe they're hitting 15 homers and stealing 19 bags and that sort of deal, and they're in a pretty decent lineup spot. So getting 3 or 4 of those studs and then really staying in tune to how people are drafting and just like trying to target those strong side platoon guys that are in good lineup positions for good teams.
yep, I love it. I almost treat outfielders in a DC like your 2 to 3 starting aces and pitching. Like you want these guys like penciled in every week if you can
Yes. Yeah.
on the DC format. So going back to your 2026 prep, we talked about the main stuff you do. Are you adding or doing anything differently this year to maybe change what you want to change from last season's results, which to me were still pretty good, but you were not overly. You still want more, which you should. Are you
Yeah.
doing anything different this year?
From a preseason prep standpoint, not like any big wholesale changes because I feel like a lot of where I went wrong was kind of in the fab process. I think it's maybe being when I'm prepping, maybe being more in tune with. I feel like I was kind of more hyper focused on playing time as opposed to the skills, and maybe I kind of missed out on a couple of those breakout type of hitters, or not even breakout type of hitters, but guys that just like crushed their value where they went because they had some of those, those power speed guys and things like that. So not so much the preseason prep. It's just kind of more of a fab, just kind of understanding like the types of players you target and like think of it more as like a weekly lineup type of deal as opposed to a season long kind of deal if that makes sense. Like I don't want to be so focused on like finding the guys that, like, all right, like this guy's going to stay on my roster the entire year. He's going to get 650 plate appearances, as opposed to thinking like, well, this guy might really pop off the page, and I can supplement my key starters, my core guys I'm drafting early on, with these types of players. So maybe just being a little bit more in tune with the kind of the skills of guys that kind of might pop, and really return more value later on.
I love it. A couple more things here on 2026, drafting wise, is from last season. And this is something a lot of us talk about, and I'm focused on certain things. Any statistics that you were kind of like underwhelming on in 2025 that you're making a bigger focus on as you start like for me, and many will say it's power. That's something you need to
Yeah.
worry about. Is there something you're making a point in your first two drafts? You're like I've made a point. I want like Pete Alonso or something like that early. It might be foolish, but that's something I'm trying to make a point to like give myself a strong start in that position.
It's power. I mean, I hate to be,
Mm.
repeating everybody, but it's power. And I was
Mhm.
blown away at just how much the percentiles continue to rise
Yep.
in power. And I think it's if you don't draft it early, you're in a tough spot because there's just not. I just don't think you're going to find many guys later in drafts that could pop off and hit, 30 homers. You might be able to find guys that can steal 15 bags, and provide you a nice little, power speed presence. And maybe those platoon guys that we're talking about. But for me, it's absolutely power. And if I can get power with batting average, that's where I'm going to steer myself as well. Cause like you got to think of like when you're drafting, kind of drafting from the bottom up. It's like
Yep.
what's going to be available to me later in the draft that the certain categories or there's certain skills that are going to be gone, by that you reach later in the draft. Like I can probably find a guy that's going to hit 230 or 240 with a little bit of power, like where I can maybe find, some of those potential power speed guys. Like I can't find a guy that's going to hit 280 and hit 30 homers. I just can't. So I almost wonder if this year it's kind of one of the things I found myself not doing more, but being a little bit more interested in is like if you just kind of have to navigate your draft in a way that you just have to, you know, try to maybe get one of those rabbit kind of guys this year. I feel like there's more of those guys. Your Jacob Marcy's, your Chandler Simpsons. I don't know if you're a Victor Scott believer. Just I think there's a few more options to where all right, these guys don't give me anything else but speed. In the case of Simpson, you get some batting average, Marcy a little bit of power, but later in the draft but like it's a little easier I think to try to plug a hole that way because you get down there and it's like there's no power, it's gone. Like it's gone, especially any sort of power with batting average is gone. And you look, it's like I think every the 14 lineup positions, I think by the 80th percentile, I think your guys have to average like 23 homers and 74 RBI or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
And you look at the projections of some players, like you're not they're not projecting for that. I mean, it might be, 15 homers, 10 steals, 60 runs, 60 RBI, hit 250, 240. I mean, that's kind of what's available to you. So I know it's like everybody's saying it, but I think the fact that everybody's saying it is like you have to be even more cognizant early in drafts
Yep.
to really try to target it. Because if you don't get it, It's tough to find that. It's tough to find that on the waiver wire, during the year. I mean, it's just like, and I think kind of goes back to what we're talking about the platoons. I think so many platoon advantages are being played down by the pro teams that they're hunting those power guys, especially those left-handed hitters, that they can throw in there against righties and try to hit home runs.
Agreed, and then they're looking for that pop to kinda just jump it off the page to your point, and it's kind of another, like, process I go through in my brain, and yes, I want the big time pitchers, especially in 15s over 12s. 12s, I feel like I can dance a little more with the pitching devil,
Yeah,
but, it just makes me wanna get as many of those 25 to 35 home run guys in, like, the first 3,
yeah.
4, 5 rounds, and then try to, play with fire afterwards, but that's another strategy debate at another date and time. You keep mentioning the 80th percentile. I was going to ask you about this while you're drafting. I know some people have spreadsheets up, some people have this, that, and the other. How do you go about, like, when you're drafting? How cognizant are you of approaching the 80th percentile numbers?
Uh, I pay attention to it. I'm not like married to it. I feel like if you go through your draft and you're like, oh my gosh, my projections say I'm low here by this many, well, if I draft this guy and plug this hole, this is kind of how it's work. I think you can get yourself into a bad predicament kind of doing that, end up drafting players you don't like to fill the spreadsheet and that sort of deal. So you shouldn't do that. But I do think you need to be cognizant of like, okay, like based on projections, this is where my team kind of rates right now. I mean, if you've got a massive deficiency, you need to figure out, is there a way to kind of steer myself back that way, or do I just really need to lean into something else and just kind of throw almost up the white flag? And part of that too is like just what's available to you later in drafts. So I do pay attention to it because I used to draft a lot early in drafts. You're trying to find the guys who just kind of give you a little bit of everything. Um, I don't think that's as easy to do now if you want to draft power early on. So it's even kind of paying attention to it a little bit more to where, okay, like if I'm drafting guys that play all the time, that have skills and they're rated well and all that sort of thing, like I should be generally fine in these sort of areas. But where am I in speed and where am I in homers and where am I kind of in batting average? Well, I feel like that's a little tough to project. But so long story short, I do pay attention to it. But I think like anybody who gets in the habit of trying to draft to please the spreadsheet, I think that's where you can go wrong and you can get yourself into a situation where, well, the projection said I was going to do this. That's not how it works.
Yeah, and I love that because the projections help you kind of know if you're falling behind too much, I guess is what I like to use it for. But
Mm.
we're also using the spreadsheet to show projections, and the projections are usually pretty cautious. So there's like levels to what's right and
Yeah.
wrong in that
The
scenario.
projections are
And
giving you the
yeah,
50th percent outcome, basically. So,
exactly.
like, there's going to be some of your guys that hit the 80th, and some of the guys that hit the 20th, and some guys hit the 50th. And just like, that's kind of goes back to talking about going through the prep is looking at projections with hitters and stuff like that, and kind of seeing like if you think that guy's going to beat that, or do you think the guy, hey, this guy's on decline, he might be on the way out from this projection. But yeah, you're right. It's a good point. Like use it kind of as a loose outline, but just because the projections of your spreadsheet say you're going to rate well in these certain areas doesn't mean it's going to happen. But kind of think about the players as those skill buckets. Like, all right, I got to get these guys that kind of give me speed, these guys that kind of give me power, these guys kind of give me batting average, and how that all works together.
And I love how you mentioned it's like don't not take a player just because the spreadsheet says it doesn't work. No, you want to shoot for the moon type things at
Yeah.
times too. So totally like that. This will kind of transition us to the 2026 early talk because the last question I have for you from here is what positions in your early drafting are you seeing that you need to potentially be more aggressive on as draft season comes along? Like we always joke, like, second base is this, third base is this, so on and so
Uh-huh.
forth. What are you seeing early on through your first two drafts that stands out as a position that you might not want to be too cautious with?
Shortstop. I think that because like if getting two good ones, especially in DCs, I say good loosely, like two guys you feel confident about are going to play pretty regularly and are not going to like actively hurt you. Um, it's just I think people reach a point in drafts where if you don't draft one of those early guys, there's kind of a lull and you wait, and then everybody starts grabbing the next tier of guys. And you don't want to get caught empty-handed especially if you wait on taking that first one, because you just can't predict. Like people are going to panic sometimes. They're going to look like, oh my gosh, I don't have a shortstop. I don't have a second shortstop. And all of a sudden you look and it's like, oh my gosh, JP Crawford went 4 rounds ahead of where he usually does. And why is Joey Ortiz going 80 picks ahead where he usually? And it's just some things happen. So shortstop to me was one that was like, it felt a little light, that like you kind of would benefit from taking an early one and then maybe pushing up that second one that you like. A lot of people have said second base is really weak. I don't think so. I mean, I at least see guys that are going to platoon that you can kind of predict. Like you can predict Cole Keith being a platoon guy. Like you can predict, Brett Beatty at least being a platoon guy. You predict Jeff McNeil now at least being a platoon guy, maybe more for
Yeah.
the A's. So Andres Jimenez, whether he bounces back with batting average, I don't know, but he's going to play for the Blue Jays. Otto Lopez is going to play. So
Yep.
that to me, I've heard of people kind of, it's talk about how, second base, like, and there's even some interesting guys later on too. If the Cardinals end up dealing all those guys like Nolan
Yep.
Gorman, you got hurt your batting average, where he's going to hit some home runs. Nick Gonzalez is probably going to play somewhere. Vaughn Grissom now is probably going to
Yes.
play. Um, I think that the cat's out of the bag on this one, but I like Nasim Nunez a lot. Like I think there's a chance he plays enough to return a lot of value there. You kind of go down, like Jose Caballero is going to start
Yep.
until Anthony Volpe is healthy. So I think second base, like I found myself a couple times. I usually try to wait as long as I can, but even I get late in drafts, like man, I wish I would have waited longer. There's a lot of guys here. It kind of just reach a point like, all right, there's three of these guys I think are values late in the draft. Why don't I just draft one of them to kind of plug in my second base or things like that. But shortstop was the one to me. And I mean, first base, it kind of depends on how your drafts go, but I really think that you want to get some power there, and you don't want to get caught. Like, I feel like there's a pretty big drop off. I find myself that like that kind of 330, 340 range in drafts. I call it like kind of the Spencer Horwich range, because that's my guy where it's like if
Yep.
he's the top of the list, I know I need to draft him because the drop off on that's pretty steep. So and then we talked a lot about outfielders.
Yep.
But to me, shortstop's the one that I feel like you probably need to have two good ones that you feel good about, because it gets really tough after that. And it's typically the position where teams do not platoon that position because they have a guy they really like defensively. So there's not as many of those guys that are platoon guys, which kind of, adds to the length of the player pool. Typically, the major league teams have their starting guy, and that's who plays, throughout the season.
Yeah, and it's a good dichotomy between shortstop and second base because shortstop's this position everyone thinks is loaded. It's very top heavy, is the way I've always said it. It's like
Yep.
you can go 9, 10, maybe max 12 deep at the position, and then it gets murky. It
Uh-huh.
gets
Yeah.
interesting after that, and it all goes like in the top like 120 picks. It feels like
Yeah.
you got to go after it. Where second base, there's a couple top heavy guys, but are they really that great? Type
Yeah.
questions, and then there's a gigantic amount towards the back end, like you said, where you can kind of pick. Like you mentioned, Otto Lopez. I love Lopez. Like I
Love
think that
auto. Yeah.
that price tag, the guy that might go 15-15 or something is phenomenal.
Yep.
Like big fan of what Otto can do for you. All right, in these early drafts, relief pitching inflation is real.
Uh-huh.
In the Bubba the Loom Discord, we talk about it a lot. I know Rob and them talk about it a lot. The last few drafts, as we use Ryan's like ADP tracker, is nuts about how
Yeah.
much because after Fairbanks signed, it's like okay, all quote unquote all the legit closers are off the board, and there's
Right.
still a bunch of teams that need closers, so that's a mess. So you really want to get your quote unquote lockdown guys. So they're going extremely early. How are you approaching that?
Man, I used to always be two like dudes early in drafts. And I told myself this year, I was like, I felt like I was kind of missing out on too much, either like one more stud hitter or one more stud pitcher. And I was like, man, maybe this year I'm gonna wait. And I kind of get in the drafts, I was like, I don't know, man. Like maybe it's just like you bite the bullet and take two good guys and just don't even worry about it the rest of the draft. I really do think like there's no like hard and fast way to do it. It really kind of depends on how your draft is going. Like the first draft I did with you and some others, I was kind of surprised at how late some guys went. And then the second draft I went into, I had to push up a roll to Chapman in the third round because closers were flying off the board. So I think if you think of it as, how many guys do you like that have the role and kind of go from there? I don't know how many of them are, like probably what, like 15 to 20, maybe? Like there's
Yeah.
not that many. And I kind of think of it as okay, each team in a 15 team draft is probably going to have one of those guys. Some people are going to try to get two of those guys. So if some people are going to try to take two of those guys early on, you've got to understand that like you better push one guy up, or you might be left with nothing. So I for sure try to draft one early. It's usually like depending on how the draft is going, I'd like to wait to the fourth round. There's just sometimes that you can't, and part of this too is depends on where you're picking in the draft. So by the end of the fourth round, I've got at least one. And if it just so happens that it plays out a certain way and there's not any hitters I really like or many starting pitchers I really like, and there's another really good reliever I like sitting there, maybe a Ryan Helsley drops a little bit, or people are scared about, Suarez behind Ross Iglesias and he drops a little bit. And it just like, all right, I think this is a nice little value here. I can take this guy and not really think about drafting relief pitchers again. They're another one of those guys in like the sixth or seventh or eighth round or something like that. But the thing that to me, talk about pushing up is it used to be, I mean, last year there'd be some guys beyond ADP 100. Maybe it's like 150, 160, 170, where there's some guys. Now it's like you're seeing Emilio Pagan go way inside the top 100. Kenley Jansen going way inside the top 100. There's not really many of those guys after that. So I think you've just got to bite the bullet and push up at least one of those guys to make sure you get one that you can feel good about, and then kind of play the board and see like, all right, these are my second tier guys. If they're available here, maybe I'll try to take one. If not, I've just got to start picking out my darts to take later in drafts and try to project who might get a majority of the state save share, even if it's just for a part of the season.
Yeah, that happened to me recently. Like I usually try to get at least one. Sometimes I'll get two early, like in the first, 100 picks. To your point, I got one, and I got hosed on everything else, and I wasn't going to force the hand, so I just
Yeah.
started specking like crazy and praying when it came to that. But it's weird. Like the elites go in like the third round, and then like you said, the second tier, they're all gone by pick 100, and
Yeah.
yeah, buckle up is the best way I can go about that one.
Yeah, and, like, you might if you try to be rigid and draft by values and ADP and stuff like that, this is the one position I feel like you just can't do that. You've gotta whatever the room is dictating about the price of relief pitchers, you've just gotta pay it. Because if you don't pay it, you're gonna not compete in that category, and if you don't compete in that category, you're not competing for an overall.
Yeah, exactly. That's the kicker. That's why people are pushing them, because people like that aren't playing DCs will look at the board and go, "What are they doing?" It's to your point right there. Is if you want the overall, you have to have
Yeah.
saves. So that's just the
Yeah,
reality
gotta have it.
situation. Let's stick to pitching and we'll go to the mound, starting pitching. Some people go early, some people wait. The elites will continue to get pushed up as we get closer to the main event season. You're kind of seeing that slowly happen in DCs right now with some of the big dogs. How are you like affecting with that? Are you sticking to power and getting pitching later, or are you kind of like your auction idea? I still want at least a couple good pitchers.
Yeah. I want a couple good pictures. In years past, I used to wait. I used to get like an ace and kinda wait. And I just from the way seeing drafts play out now and kinda looking at the starting pitcher pool, I don't think there's more. I think instead of like big globs where there's kind of runs, I feel like there's more pockets this year where there's kind of like a group of 6 or 8 guys that kind of go in this range. I kind of think back to last year where you had that like 80 to 100 ADP range where it was like Hunter Green and Joe Ryan and Tanner Bybee and Hunter Brown. And like you clearly had this very defined group. And I was like, I just want to draft guys from this spot. And now I think there's just kind of ebbs and flows to that. You kind of got I think the one kind of glob is that like prospect recently debuted pitcher group, the Noel McLeans and the Cam Schlitlers and Trey Savages and all those sorts of guys kind of go in a certain spot, but everything else is kind of there's just kind of little pockets of it. So I find myself wanting to target starting pitching a little bit more aggressively earlier on, kind of more of a power starting pitcher, get your one relief ace, kind of a start to drafts, and just see how the starting pitcher pool kind of plays out after that. kind of see if like people are going to push up some guys well ahead, or they're kind of go a little bit more in an easier range. Like my first DC didn't have as much invested in starting pitcher early on, so I was like, okay, I need to make sure I target some of those 15th round, 20th round kind of a guys. Whereas my other one is like the way it played out is like, well, I'm kind of getting left with some good pitching values, I think. So let's lean the starting pitcher early on and lean into those hitting values later on. So this is the first year in a while I find myself wanting to get I'm okay with like Scooble fell to me in the eighth of my second DC. Like I took him. I was like, I'm okay with that sort of investment here. Just looking at how starting pitching is this year, whereas years past have been like hard and fast. Nah, two hitters first. See if the reliever starter there is like in the third and fourth round, and kind of go from there. Now I find myself a little bit more open to jumping in and getting two of those studs in the first 5 rounds with some power bats and maybe a closer as well.
Speaking, so you mentioned that the Scooble fell to 8, so you're cool taking him there. You mentioned you usually do about 8 DCs. How do you differentiate your DCs to potentially use them to help you in fab leagues, or do
Yeah.
you, or is it a different flow? 'Cause some people say they use them strictly to prepare. Some people use them to, let's make the best teams and make money. How do you go about that? Because I know I, for one, I usually don't take pitching early, but I had like the 6th or 7th pick, and I'm like, okay, J Ram's gone. These guys are gone. This next tier of outfielders are kind of murky. I took a Scooble. I'm like, let's see how this
Uh-huh.
build looks. So, how do you go about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Part of it is what you just said is just seeing how the builds play out. But I mean, make no mistake. I mean, I
We
mean,
all want to
if we're
win money.
drafting these, we're all going to win.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I think there's an element to seeing how the builds play out, and also for me, like I will diversify. Uh, the two things I'll diversify a lot are the first pitchers I take and the first closers I take, because you don't want to sink a lot of your ships because you loaded up on the same SP1 in 5 out of your 8 leagues and the same top closer in 5 out of your 8 leagues. I mean, it just makes sense to kind of spread out. Like, so I don't know the next time I'll draft a Scooble unless he just like I'm pick 13 and he's sitting there or something like that. So there's definitely a diversification element to it, but yeah, a lot of this is prep. A lot of it is seeing what builds work, but it's also too like trying to draft the best possible team to win the league and hopefully compete in an overall. But it's like it's kind of what KDS gives you too. Like if I draft early in a draft, I try to set it to where okay, if I get my pick, I'm gonna draft later in the draft just to see how those builds look, what players are available to you, and all that sort of stuff as well. But yeah, trying out those builds, seeing what it looks like, but also too just trying to make it the best possible team.
All right, just a couple more things here. Transactions, like I mentioned earlier, we've seen. I'd say half the free agent pool seems like it's disappearing. The Orioles have been aggressive with Alonzo, Ward, and Boz through trades and signings. Pirates, White Sox out of nowhere. Mets seem like they're losing guys. Um, how do you adjust your approach when you see some of these moves? Because like you mentioned Nick Gonzalez, he should play, but there's a lot of moving parts in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, right.
And so I guess the more wide based question is, as these moves happen and we've already drafted, the player pool and the ADP is going to change.
Uh-huh.
How do you adjust your philosophy compared to where it was before?
Yeah, it's a great question. For example, my second draft, I think I took Kobe Mayo like pick 517. It
Yep,
just it just
I
kept
loved him before that. I'm with you. Yeah.
yeah, and it's just like he kept falling and falling and falling and falling and falling. And I think he reached a point like, okay, we know this guy has skill, and yeah, the role is murky, but um, that's the type of guy you just kind of bet on the skills, and maybe there's a trade, and maybe he just gets in there. I don't know, every so often provide some value, but um, yeah, first you kind of look at just try to project the playing time as best you can. Obviously, the Orioles have like 9 right-hand hitting first basemen now, so you got to try to, Alonso is probably certainly a very durable guy, so you can probably go ahead and pencil him in for 162, and just try to see how that impacts the rest of the lineup. But looking at how it works the playing time, I always think too, like this doesn't really apply necessarily to some of these guys that I've signed recently, but like the defensive value of these guys and how that impacts teams, where guys might play, who might lose playing time because of this, who might become more of a utility guy because of this, that sort of thing. I kind of look at the Pirates, and it's like the first time they've had a lot of left right balance and a lot of versatility. O'Hearn can play first in the outfield. Brandon Lowe's played a lot of second base. I know Keith Law threw out the idea of him having more value in the outfield. I don't think the Pirates would do that. What does this mean like for Jared Triolo, who's elite defensively, he could play all over the place? Like, where does Jake Mangum fit into this? And you kind of look at their bench. They've got a bunch of right-handed guys on the bench now too that are kind of natural platoon partners for a lot of these guys. So, kind of going through and seeing like where guys fit defensively, because that's like the one of the first things the pro teams are going to think of is like where is this guy's defensive value fit best to impact the team. And then also a big part too is like I didn't necessarily pay attention to this enough in the past is the park factors. Like, look and see, if the hitting environment changed dramatically. I'm more interested now in Pete Alonso than I was when he was with the Mets, simply because of the park. I mean, you kind of look through it, how many home runs he was projected to hit if he played his games at Camden Yards as a play in the City Field, and it's a pretty notable difference. And that can matter, man. If you're squeezing out 2 or 3 more home runs from a guy, how many times have we seen standings at the end of the year come down to a homer or RBI or run scored or whatever it is? So seeing how the park impacts these guys as well, and how their skills fit into a new park. But really just kind of going through, looking at playing time and kind of trying to project where guys fit, where they're going to hit in the lineup, how that impacts everybody else on the roster. And, we spend so much time thinking about that and kind of get to the season, the month end, there's 3 injuries and it doesn't really matter anymore. But at least in the meantime, you would be doing yourself a disservice to not say, okay, Kobe Mayo, less likely to play now. Like, okay, Ryan Mountcastle, less likely to play now. Is there going to be a trade? I don't know. It's kind of hard to project that. Okay, Nick Gonzalez, probably a little less likely to be an everyday guy now. Jared Triolo, what happens with him and that sort of deal? And these are like deep DC kind of questions, but these are guys you're going to be thinking about during the FAB process as well.
Exactly. And that's a great point. The FAB process is very important because these names all come up throughout that FAB process.
Yes.
But I love how you mentioned that, like the Mayo, for instance, because I was all about that. Like they loved him late. He should play. He's so cheap in drafts. And now it's up in flames. But there's
Yeah.
always the opposites too. Like we talk about drafting early for values, perceived values, and not. It's like Mayo, that didn't pan out for now. But hey, it just takes one injury for playing time to shift around
Right.
and things can change. But there's also the guys that all of a sudden, get traded and have like I didn't like Jake Mangum with Tampa Bay, but now he might
Right.
actually be a nice platoon piece. Like you mentioned the speed part
Yeah.
earlier,
Yeah.
batting average and speed. Like he
Right.
enters your rabbit world all of a sudden.
Uh-huh.
So it's just there's winners and losers to all this. And so drafting early has its pros and cons, of course, but we do it because we love it. I think the last question I have for you, what are you looking forward to the most in 2026? It can be fantasy, it can be baseball. Either
Ooh.
way, what are you looking forward to the most in 2026?
Oh man. That's a great question. I mean, Vegas has just turned into such a
Yeah.
destination highlight like weekend for me. I mean, I've now taken my wife out there 2 years. And we just kind of turned it into a little, weekend vacation getaway type of deal. And it's just so much fun. Like playing the game is fun and we're all competitive and drafting is fun and managing your teams. I'd say it's fun 80% of the time and you want to rip your hair out 20% of the time. But like the community element to it is so cool. I mean, the fact that like years ago, I mean, I started playing the NFBC during COVID year, I think. And I didn't really know anything about it. I don't even remember how I got into it exactly. I think I just fell into a certain Twitter rabbit hole and I was like, hey, I love fantasy baseball. Why don't I do this? And ever since then, I'm like, I'm in y'all's Discord. I'm in Rob's Discord. I've got buddies I text with about this, and like, I just look forward to Vegas. And it's like I see
Yep.
people I've befriended over the years. I mean, the first time I went to Vegas, I think it was 4 years ago. I didn't know anybody besides Paul Sporer because we both lived in Austin. We both did Plucker's wing trivia at the same place and just kind of befriended each other over the years through baseball and stuff like that. I didn't know anybody else otherwise. I was like, I'm just going to go. I'm going to live draft. I'm going to meet people. And it's true. Everybody's so nice. They're so inviting. So the community element to it, I just love the Vegas weekend, just seeing people, catching up with people, having a great time, drafting. I mean, I don't know about you, Bubba, but I don't have many people on my phone that I can just say, "Hey, man, what do you think about this guy's playing time? After this trade." There's not many people I grew up with in life that will give me an answer about that or not call me a lunatic or something like that. So to me, it's the Vegas weekend. Like if anybody out there is considering it, never done it, even if you're not going to draft, even if you just want
Yep.
to go watch drafts and bump into people and talk about fantasy baseball, just go do it. Go have a fun time. I look forward to that every single year. I've already booked my flights. I cannot wait to get out there again and hopefully draft some good teams. But really, it's just seeing everybody and that community aspect is what is just such a big boost about this crazy hobby that we have.
I second that. It's absolutely outstanding. Ryan and I went last year for the first time. We didn't draft either. We recorded some shows. Like Dustin joined us for a few minutes, and
Mhm.
we went and just watched drafts. We had an absolute blast hanging out with everybody. Went to dinner with people. Like it's just a big community bonding experience. Sounds goofy, but that's what it is.
Yeah, that's
And,
what it
and
is.
but to your point, I laugh all the time. Like with Ryan recording with him all the time, Ben, and just multiple other people. I talk to them more than I talk to most people these days because
Right.
like my friends think what I do is just insane. They're like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I get it. I get it. It's not football. I'm sorry, but yeah, I love it. It's the Vegas thing is a great point. And look forward to hanging out with you again
We'll have some
while we're
beers for
there.
sure. Looking
Yes,
forward to it.
we will. And I could talk to you all day, but I'm gonna let you get back to your wonderful family, and I'm gonna
Oh,
actually go.
you can keep me 8 hours. I'm sure they'll have it under control,
Um,
right?
we'll have to do this again when it gets closer to maybe Vegas and check what have we learned through our too many drafts leading up to
Yeah,
Vegas.
yeah.
We'll chat then, but I just want to say thank you for joining me. I hope you guys have a happy holiday and a happy New Year's coming up. And again, we'll check in and do this again sometime.
Yeah, and thank you, Bubba, man. It's a pleasure to be on here again. I listen to you guys all the time. I do a lot of driving, especially in the spring. So you guys are always, I just appreciate the consistent content you guys produce. I mean, you guys don't have an off season. You're always talking about players, looking back, looking ahead. I jumped into the Discord a few weeks ago, using the products and stuff like that. So for anybody out there who's listening, man, it's a great community. You guys do an awesome job. Have awesome products. Jump in there, mix it up, have some fun. But yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the shot. We love doing it, and Ryan's a genius with those things he puts together. So
He's a
I
wizard
use
with
them.
that Excel and Google
It's
Sheet stuff, man. He's
It's
good.
ridiculous. It's ridiculous, but that's why we keep him around. No, I'm just kidding. But everyone, check out Dustin on Twitter at Dustin L McComas, and if you can make it to Vegas, come hang out. But until next time, this was Benched with Bubba, episode 801. Catch y'all later.